Welcome to part 2 of the Wizard Pill devlog. Last week I set my goals to create a system for populating my dungeon with furniture, and I can say I have successfully done that. I'll be going over the main issues I faced while working on it. I started with placing small items that just took up one tile of space. All that happens is a random tile that does not already have an item on it is chosen and an item is placed in the middle of it. It also rotates the item some, so everything doesn't look perfectly uniform. That was simple enough to do with small items, but when building larger items that needed a 2x2 space instead of a single tile, I ran into issues. So the strange part about placing an item in a 2x2 square is finding the middle of it. After some braining, I found that just taking an average will work to find the middle, which is the definition of an average. In retrospect, it's pretty obvious, but I had to stop and think about it for like 5 whole minutes, and I even took a piece of paper and wrote down some math to figure it out. And looking back on it, I kind of feel dumb for it. But I implemented it, and even though my math was right, it still wasn't working, and I wasn't entirely sure why. So when taking the average, I had 4 locations, one for each square. I added them together, and I divided them by 4, which is how you take the average. But I was still having issues with items being placed off-center. To figure out what kept going wrong and why my numbers were coming up wrong, I looked at the math that I did for the average. Maybe I typed something wrong, or maybe my logic wasn't sound. But after a while, I had figured out that instead of being my math that is wrong, it was the numbers I was using to do the math. I needed 4 positions in order for the average to be properly taken. And instead, I kept getting 3 positions. Sometimes I'd get all 4 positions, but they would be in a line, a 4x1 line instead of a 2x2 square. Sometimes I even found out they were in an L shape, like you're moving a knight on a chessboard. So I had to turn my attention to the algorithm that was picking the spaces that the items could spawn on. In order to get the 2x2 area for these larger items, the algorithm would start out by picking a random location just like it did with the smaller items. This location would stand as the starting point for the algorithm. From the starting point, it would pick a random direction, up, down, left, or right. Then it would go left and left, or it would go right and right. Now, the problem with this is when I was creating this, I was thinking of it as if I was walking into these rooms and needed to pick a direction to turn around. To turn around, if you turn left twice, you're turned around. This doesn't work because I'm not doing it from a relative standpoint. I'm doing it from a global standpoint. So left is always the same direction. This is what would lead to my flaw. Sometimes the object would be in the shape of an L because it would go up and then move left or right twice, creating an L shape. Sometimes it would move right and then go right 2 more times, creating a 1x4 long shape. And sometimes I would get 3 because it would go right, then it would move left twice. And that would result to only 3 unique spaces instead of 4. This complex series of steps was making it really hard to work with, and it was making it even harder to debug. So I turned to my friend, and he suggested that instead of all this complexity, I cut it down and use one algorithm every single time. And the one I used was starting space, you move right, you move down, you move left. That always gives me 4 shapes, and there's no randomness to it. And so, doing that, I ended up taking 40 lines of code out of a single function. What was strange about it is, when he suggested it, I liked the idea, but a part of my brain didn't. And I had to go into my head and have a conversation to convince my brain that this was a good idea. And while me and my friend were talking about it, I was on autopilot while I was arguing with myself in my head to fix it. It was strange and surreal. So we ended up implementing the solution, and it worked. It prevented any clipping between objects that spawned. While I was trying to figure out what went wrong with my placement algorithm, there were times where I felt like I needed a break, so I would always turn and work on a different part of the project. So I decided to work on the post-processing of the project. Every frame that you're looking at in a video game is just a picture taken from the perspective of the in-game camera. It takes a whole bunch of these pictures a second 60 of them to be exact, and shows you them in order to create the illusion of movement. These pictures, after the computer has taken them, can be edited to change colors and add extra things on top of them. This is what post-processing is. It changes the image after it was taken. Typically, they include a lot of color correction. Unity has a few presets that you can add into your project that help do a lot of the work for you. One of them is a vinaigrette. That's not right.
Vignette.
Oh, vignette. A vignette has a darkened circle around the vision, and you see it a lot, especially in first-person games when the character takes a big hit, typically stomach punch, and the screen darkens around the edges. That's a vignette. Another big one is bloom. It basically enhances light sources and makes them shine brighter. You see it very well in Ark Survival Evolved. And finally, I added some saturation and post-exposure to bring the mood down. Makes it more blue, makes it look more like you're in a dungeon. After working on it, I can say I've liked the game a lot better with the post-processing. But y'all could leave a comment telling me to change it, and while you're at it, maybe you can subscribe and be notified when I continue this game development path. That's all I worked on this week, but next week my goals are going to be to add the core mechanic of the game, telekinesis. This will include needing to make items be able to be picked up, a targeting system so the player can know which items are going to be picked up, an aiming system that allows the players to throw items that they picked up with their telekinesis, and a visual feedback for every one of those other features. So items are going to highlight whenever you can pick them up, and the player will have a visual aid that helps them aim their items after they have them picked up, so they can accurately throw them at enemies. So I hope to see y'all next week. Bye-bye.